You're now listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast, the ultimate insider's guide for all things ocean shipping. Brought to you by Kaishax, helping you deliver through volatility.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast. I'm your co-host, Caroline Weaver, and with me is Lars Jensen. Lars, I see you're calling in from the van.
I am indeed calling in from Sally the van. I am in Brittany right now, 2 weeks into the Synchro Sally voyage.
How's it going so far?
So far going fine. France is having a bit of a heat wave, and with Sally not having aircon, this is with open windows and still a hot podcast to do.
A rugged life. Thanks for joining, and we're excited to hear more about the trip as it progresses. Let's start off today talking about the read on NiFi, Asia to US West Coast. So what's going on here?
After we talked about it a week ago, it seemed that the Pacific rate increases were flattening out. But things changed again, and rates simply continued upwards, basically soaring. And we went up roughly $5 per 40 foot to the West Coast, and as much as $600 to the East Coast, showing West Coast. Here, East Coast follows basically exactly the same, just slightly higher level. What I would rather take away from this, and that's also why we're showing it here with the spread. I think we've talked about the spread before. What the spread, the graph here is showing, you see the darker shaded area. The lower bound, that's the customers that pay at the 25% level versus where we are for the between the highest and lowest, up to 75. And the lighter shaded areas is between the 10 and 90. So there are people that are paying at the lower end of the white shaded band, and also people that pay at the higher end. Doesn't necessarily mean that some are being overcharged more than others. It can be slight differences in what's the relations with the carriers, what's the volume you're shipping with. There can be many reasons for the rate differential. But what I find interesting here is if we look at the 10%, 90% spread, a month ago, that was about $1,000, give or take. So $1,000 difference between the lower and the higher paying marks. Fast forward to last week, the spread has now escalated to $2,400. That is a very wide spread. You can see in the rest of the graph here, the spread alone is actually more than what the freight rate was prior to the market going berserk here in early summer. So we are now literally at a point where somebody is paying the full freight rate more than somebody else. If we say the full freight rate is what we paid before the market went up. And we touched upon it before, the wider this spread gets, the more it is a sign of a very unsettled market, where neither shippers nor carriers are actually quite certain about what direction are we going in here, what is going to happen. So uncertainty on the Pacific ramping up potentially even faster than the freight rates themselves in what we're seeing right now. So that's in the Pacific. A relevant question would then be, okay, if the Pacific is that uncertain, do we see the same pattern in the other major East-West trade over on Asia to Europe? And if we switch to Asia or Europe, we don't quite find the same. We find it somewhat. But if we're looking at it, rates only went up, only in quotation marks. I'm not the one who has to pay the higher rates, but it went up about $200 per 40 foot compared to last week. So the rate of increase seems to be slowing down a bit. Mm-hmm. In this case, we are also seeing the spread increase. And if we look back before the past months, the spread on the 10%, 90% roughly tended to be around $500 between the lower and the higher paying marks. Right now, we can see it visually as well that this spread is increasing, and it's now up to $1,300 in spread when we're looking at rates per 40 foot. So yes, spread is increasing, so uncertainty is also coming into the North European market in terms of where is this going, but it is nowhere near at the level what we see in the Pacific. As mentioned, here's $1,300. Pacific was a $2,400 spread, with the Pacific spread being even higher than the freight rate itself just a few months ago. That is not the case yet on Asia-Europe. We will have to see how this unfolds. My gut feeling still tells me that what we're looking at is a very sharp temporary spike in the Pacific, whereas what we see on Asia-Europe is a more fundamentally supported, strong peak season that we're going into. So my expectation would still be, and I could be wrong, just as everybody can, but I would expect the Pacific peak season to be over faster than the Asian or Europe peak season.
Yeah, it seems like it's because it's not really moving steadily in one direction. You're moving in one direction up, I guess, but because of the vast differences in freight rates. I think that prediction makes sense.
And maybe a final comment here. You good people over at NYSEX have been making a few posts here of the last few weeks in terms of how rapidly the amount of futures contracts that are being signed are actually increasing. And I think that's also a good sign, because with the market this unsettled, this unpredictable, basically both as a shipper and a carrier, you have a choice. Do you want to roll the dice at the casino, whether this goes up or down, or do you want some level of certainty for some of your shipments?
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point. Anything else you want to add on NiFi rates?
No, I think that should be plenty to keep people thinking, at least for the next week.
Sounds good. All right. So we've had a lot happen in the Strait of Hormuz over the last week. So can you catch our listeners up on where things stand?
Yeah, we are back to square one. It's been a total calamity. If we compare to when you and I spoke a week ago, there has been 7 attacks on ships crossing the Strait of Hormuz. A few days ago, one of them was a container ship from Global Feeder Shipping, 7,000 TEU ship. It got hit, crew abandoned ship. It appears that one of the seafarers are missing. Then over the last 24 hours, it became really bad. 3 tankers have been attacked. One of them was hit so badly that one of the seafarers, an Indian national, he lost his life, and 8 more are hospitalized because they got injured during the attack. That is basically where we are. As we are speaking now, I checked the news just before we logged on and recorded the podcast here. This is afternoon in France as we are recording this. U.S. is in progress with another intensified bombing round on Iran. Iran has had multiple bombing rounds on all of the neighboring countries here over the last 24 hours. This appears to be getting worse and not better. What we should also maybe have a slight talk about is this thing, is the Hormuz Strait open or closed?
I was about to ask you about that.
Yeah. And I think maybe for the sake of clarity, we should also acknowledge open or closed might be the wrong words to use. Because when you say something is, for example, closed, you might think of a toll road. And somebody has put a barrier across the road is closed, you cannot use it. That is obviously not the case with a waterway. You can always sail your ship through if you want to. There is nothing physically blocking you. So the words closed and open is somewhat of a misnomer. What we have to understand here, when Iran says, for example, the strait is closed, what that means is if you sail a ship through, you risk the Iranians quite literally shooting missiles and drones at your ship, trying to sink it or kill your people. That is what it means. And Iran was announcing over the weekend, strait is closed. That was immediately followed by a statement from the U.S. administration saying the strait is open. And they were also out saying you have this corridor that's been designated by the U.S. and say, fine, this is a safe corridor in the south. They actually went out and said, no, you can still use the southern corridor. It is safe. The strait is open. And it is in the wake of this, we saw the attack on the container ship and on the 3 tankers over the last 72 hours. So we have to acknowledge when the U.S. administration says the strait is open, that only means that, sure, you can sail your vessel in, but we can also very clearly see on the ground, the U.S., at least for now, is not either able or willing to provide the military protection to allow for safe passage, with 4 ships actually being shot at. That is the facts on the ground as it is right now. So if closed means it is high risk, your ship is going to get shot at, then the Hormuz Strait is closed right now. The pickup we saw in transits the last couple of weeks are completely gone. Virtually nothing is moving through the Strait of Hormuz right now. There's a few ships clearly running a high risk. Different shipping lines, different risk profiles. The newest element thrown into the mix was the statement on social media yesterday by President Trump, saying that he would institute a 20% toll for cargo going through the Strait of Hormuz. And by the way, reiterating the strait is open. I would refer back to the discussion of what open means. What does that mean? First of all, I think we have to recognize Trump sometimes says a lot on social media, in this case on tolls in the Hormuz Strait. We have seen it over the last year and a half when it comes to tariffs on different commodities in different countries. Sometimes this leaves social media and becomes reality. Sometimes this just stays in social media and never happens. In this case, it is exceedingly likely this is going to stay in social media. Because if you start to think through, what does 20% toll mean? First of all, it's 20% toll of the value of the cargo. So I sat down and did a little back of the envelope math. If you look at the year before the Hormuz crisis, you have the, for example, Shanghai Container Freight Index between Shanghai and Dubai. On average, the freight rate was $1,400 per 20 foot. We can also look at global statistics. What's the value of cargo inside a container? The average global number is $54,500 per container. So if you're going to pay Trump's 20% tariff as a shipper, you're going to pay $10,900 per TEU to get your container through the Strait of Hormuz.
It's steep.
$10,900 in protection fee versus your $1,400 freight rate. This would move freight rates beyond any records we have seen both during the pandemic and during the Hormuz crisis. Obviously, no one is going to move cargo at those kinds of fees. That is one element of it. The second element, which of course is also not addressed, is what is the legal basis for doing this? Fundamentally, there isn't any. It's as simple as that. And who is it that says there is no legal basis for doing this? That's actually the U.S. administration themselves. When we heard months ago that Iran was instituting a toll, the U.S. position was that is illegal, you cannot do it. So when we're saying this is illegal, I'm actually just saying what the U.S. administration's own stance on the legality is. That, of course, doesn't prevent them from saying, we don't care, we're going to do it anyhow. So let's take it a step further. If this is actually going to be implemented, how would you do that? Are you going to charge the shipping line? Are you going to charge the vessel operator, the managing company? Are you going to charge the cargo owners? That's entirely unknown. So let's, for simplicity's sake, say you're going to charge, let's say, the vessel operator, just to pick one. How is this then going to be done? Sure, the U.S. Navy can say, fine, we're going to send you a bill because you're sailing your ship through. What if the company says, we're not going to pay, we're just going to sail the ship through anyway? Let's up the ante a bit, and let's say this is a German company. So the German company will say, we're not going to pay $10,900 per TEU, but the 10,000 TEU we have on board, not going to happen. But they sail the vessel through. What recourse will the U.S. then have? If they are serious about this, they would then need the U.S. military to board this German ship, halt the ship, and basically hold the ship and its crew hostage until that bill is paid. I don't see that having any realistic chance of actually happening.
Yeah. And I think the logistics of trying to collect this fee, how are you going to do that? The alternative is you have to put your money where your mouth is and you be more assertive about it. It seems highly unlikely.
We don't have any numbers on how many actually pay Iran and how many don't. It seems some shipping lines have actually paid, but how is Iran then enforcing it? That's very simple. They shoot at ships. I don't see the U.S. going to shoot at other ships just because they're not paying at all.
Well, that would be a big
I
development.
simply cannot see that up. Yeah, exactly. So that's completely unrealistic. So I think this is one of the elements where it grabs a lot of headlines, but it's going to remain on social media because it has no realistic way of actually happening.
And even if you pay the toll, it's not like you're getting protection, right?
No, as we can see the last 24 hours after the U.S. administration said the strait is open, just go through, they were either unwilling or unable to protect the 4 ships that actually got hit.
Yeah.
So not much of a protection service you get for your money.
Yeah. It's an interesting situation, though. All right. Anything else to add there? Or should we move on to our next topic?
Yeah, I think the only thing to add is right now, it is hard to see what is the end game for this. We're all the way back to square one. We're back to the early phases of the war. There is no ceasefire. If we follow the same pattern as we saw 4 months ago, this is going to escalate further. We have had a few attacks from Iran yesterday on the port of Duqm down in Oman. So if we follow the same playbook as for 4 months ago, and we might very well see that, we might unfortunately also see Iran up the ante and start attacking some of the port facilities in neighboring countries.
Yeah. All right. We'll keep an eye out on things as they develop. Let's talk a little bit about the Suez routings. We've talked in previous episodes about some carriers moving through the Suez again. Sounds like we've got another carrier, another service moving through there. What's happening?
Yes, because we have had, I think we talked about it a week ago, we had Gemini, so Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, announced they were switching their AE-15 Asia-Mediterranean service to go through, which they actually are. When I look at all the head-haul vessels on that one, they are still on track to go through, despite the developments in the Strait of Hormuz over the last few days. They still seem to be on track. Maersk then announced their Mekelle service, which is their U.S. East Coast to the Middle East service, also transitioning. That still seems to be on track. And as of yesterday, Maersk furthermore announced that their WAF-6 service, which is our West Africa, Mediterranean, Middle East service, now also shipped to a Suez routing. So it would appear that Maersk's risk assessment for now is that despite the sharp deterioration in the Strait of Hormuz, they still believe that the Red Sea is not going to be as impacted as one might fear. That's the situation for now. If that then changes, if the Strait of Hormuz goes completely out of proportion, remains to be seen. But for now, it seems Maersk is still cautiously optimistic about a return to Suez.
Yeah, definitely a good thing to see. Some normalization, at least.
Yes.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on what's going on in the Suez routings. Let's talk a little bit about OOCL's Q2 results. So those were just released. What were the findings in that?
Yeah, as usual, OOCL are the first ones out of the gate. They always are, and that means we don't have any other carriers to compare to. So if you look at their Q2 results, so for cargo April, May, and June, their volumes are up almost 9%, rates are up 10%, which is actually a very good performance. As mentioned, we don't have other carriers to compare to, but we can compare to global data from Container Trade Statistics. CTS don't have data yet for June. Data is always lagged a bit, but if we use April and May as an indication, we have actually seen OOCL gain market share. So OO's volumes were up basically 9%. And that's twice the rate of the whole world. The world is up at around 4.5. So roughly, OOCL in volume grew twice as fast as the rest of the world. On the rates, it's a different story. OO's rates are up 10%, which is, of course, great for OO, but the global rates were actually up 18% in the same period. So I was about to say this is the classical one we tend to see, not always, but quite often. If you're gaining volume share, then usually your rates don't increase as fast as market and vice versa. It's the age-old trade. Want volume or do you want rate? And that seems to be the one playing out here again for OO.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, that'll be cool to see when the other carriers release the results, how they are all comparing. So I'm sure we'll follow up on that as they're released. Are there any other topics that you want to talk about today before we wrap up?
Part of the whole Synchro voyage here is, of course, to explore Africa. And I'm not come to Africa yet, but that doesn't prevent me from meeting with people with interesting projects. And yesterday, I met with a company here in France called Windcoop that are building a container ship with massive sails.
Ooh.
And if that sounds odd and people saying this certainly cannot be done, you should know that this company already has a vessel with giant sails operating. It's not a container vessel. It's a project cargo vessel. It's been in operation since 2023. It moves rockets. So you have the European Space Program. They're building the Ariane rocket in France. It needs to be sailed down to French Guiana in South America for launch. This is a wind-assisted ship that does this. So the ship has a normal engine, but also has sails. Basically, depending on weather conditions, you save between 15 and 40% of the fuel on the vessel. What does that have to do with container ships? Now, what does this have to do with container ships? Right now, they are building a container ship in Turkey. That's also going to have these massive sails. It will be delivered in mid-2027. And the relevance to the Africa journey is this is going to ply a route combining France directly to a bunch of small ports in Madagascar. So I'm almost tempted to say this is a reversal to the good old spice trades of the 15 and 1600s. We're using sail and we're moving valuable spices. I actually think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I'm curious, like, if it spreads more globally or if it's, cost prohibitive to build it or maintain it. I can't imagine the size of these sails.
Yeah, but you can say, in this case, the ship they're building now is very small, seen with container shipping highs. It's 230 TEU, which of course means this is very much a niche service for this purpose. What they do have is actually on the drawing board, and they are looking for people with interest in it. So please go look up Windcoop if you're interested. But they're planning to build a series of 2,700 TEU vessels to set up an Atlantic service. If it goes according to plan, This might be operational from late 2029, where you could then have an Atlantic service, which is a lot more emission friendly than basically any other fuel you have out there, because you have the wind assistance, but you have a normal engine on board, so you're not going to be stuck in the middle of the Atlantic if the wind dies down.
Yeah. Do you know if they tend to go faster, or is it maybe just comparable to a regular engine?
No, yeah, you can say it's comparable to normal sailing. The one for Madagascar, because it's so special, is actually a lot faster. The reason it's a lot faster is they will call some of these small ports on the north coast of Madagascar, where today, if you want to ship, Madagascar is the world's largest exporter of vanilla, for example. If you want to export that, you have to go from these small ports on a tiny feeder to a major port in Madagascar. Then you might need a feeder to another hub. Then you can go on another vessel. Then you need another feeder. So you actually end up, because you have this specific service, with a massive time saving.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Look forward to hearing more of these more interesting niche stories as you make your travels. All right. Thanks for joining us, Lars. We appreciate you logging in from the car and giving us some insight. If you haven't already subscribed, we are on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube, and we also have our newsletter, so if you haven't signed up for that and want to receive a recap of the episode to your email address, there's a link in the show notes for you to do that. But we will be back next week. Hope everyone has an awesome, productive week. Bye, y'all.
Thanks for listening to the Supply Chain Secrets podcast, presented by NiceX. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.